yesterday in a very long post on his Truth social media site. He blamed Zelensky, not Putin, who, by the way, bombed the hell out of Kyiv, killing 10 people and injuring dozens last night, all civilians, by the way. He blames Zelensky for the failure to come to the table and says basically you can either come to the table and cede Crimea and admit that Crimea, in his views, is Russian now, or you can lose the whole of Ukraine in the next 3 years. So what does Greg Swenson make of that? He's the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Very good afternoon to you, Greg.
Hello, Julia.
Hello, thanks for joining us. Is Donald Trump right in blaming Zelensky rather than Putin for the failure of peace talks for Ukraine?
Yeah, I don't know that he's blaming Zelensky. In fact, the White House is running ads on Fox News, your cousin station here in the U.S. You know, he's been running ads blaming Putin and being very critical of Putin, talking about the peace proposal. So, you know, I think this is just, maybe he doesn't find that the criticism from Zelensky, doesn't find that productive or constructive at this time in the negotiations that are going on in London. But I do think that, you know, he's just trying to get to the end game.
Sorry,
just getting to the outcome.
This is one of the things. Now I know, again, you weren't sort of a Trump fanatic at all. We talked many times ahead of the choice of the Republican candidate, but who you and I would prefer. But yeah, we supported him for the actual election as the better of the two choices. But again, it's the failure of people in America on the right to actually even admit that what is before us in black and white. In his Truth Social statement, he said as she says, the statement made by Zelensky today, basically not accepting that Crimea is Russian, because it's not. The statement made by Zelensky today will do nothing but prolong the killing field, and nobody wants that. We are very close to a deal, but the man with no cards to play, meaning Zelensky, should now finally get it done. Then, speaking in the Oval Office last night, he said it was Ukraine that was making peace talks difficult rather than Russia. He said, I will say that I think Russia is ready. We have to get a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky. I thought it might have been easier to deal with Zelensky, but so far it's been harder. But that's OK. I think we have a deal with both. I hope they do it. Zelensky's made it very clear that the terms of the deal on offer are unacceptable, as they would be to any nation state, because it is all but a surrender to the Russian invaders. Why does Donald Trump think that's a peace deal and not a surrender deal?
I'm not sure how to define it. I don't think it's a surrender deal. I think it's going to. I think both sides are going to be unhappy with any outcome. Obviously Putin wanted to invade Kyiv and take over Ukraine. That didn't work out for him. Thank goodness. But I do think that we're at a point, a stalemate, where it's just got to end. And I don't think everyone's going to be happy, and especially Zelensky. But I do think that look, they had an opportunity 18 months ago when the Joint Chief of Staff's chief Mark Milley went to Biden and said, this is at a stalemate. It's not the Ukrainians cannot win this war. Let's settle. And his counterpart in Ukraine went to Zelensky and said the same thing. Zelensky fired his military chief, and Biden ignored Mark Milley. And here we are 18 months later, probably pushing 24
But the problem isn't Zelensky or Ukraine. The problem is the Russian invading force. We're at a stalemate because Ukraine hasn't been given the weaponry and the aid that it could have been given by the West, by the US, by Europe, to enable it to fight back harder and to reclaim that territory. The thing I was asking, what American would cede, say, the equivalent of California or Florida to an invading force on the basis that, well, after 3.5 years, we're in a stalemate, we may as well give up? Because what's being asked of Ukraine is equivalent to that. Both Crimea and the Donbass are absolutely vital, strategic parts of that nation state.
Yeah.
So why does America think that Ukraine should give up and surrender that territory, when Americans would never do that with their own territory?
Right, but it's not our territory, and that's what's really clear to the Americans right now. Yeah, I mean, it's essentially that's a point.
I like the honesty. We don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily the case. I'm just
Why do you care about Israel then?
It doesn't.
That's not your territory either. But Trump cares about Israel.
Yeah, well, Ukraine does not rank. Okay, we can admit that. It doesn't mean that we want them to lose. It doesn't mean that we want them to continue fighting and dying either. So, look, the alternative, Julia, is Ukraine continues to fight and tries to win the war. Good luck with that. I don't think that's going to happen. No European country has volunteered boots on the ground.
True.
So all this kind of virtue signaling about Ukraine good, Russia bad, which is true, but who's going to fight that war? It's
Well,
going
the
to be
Ukrainians, no, the Ukrainians
yes,
are
and they will
are
run
fighting
out of
that
bodies because Putin is not afraid to sacrifice his own people and the North Korean soldiers that he's sending into cannon fodder. He's not afraid to do that. They will win because they have more people to die. And that's a shame,
well,
but it is what it is.
I think, I mean, again, you would think they'd have won by now on that basis, and yet they haven't, which tells you something.
And the Ukrainians have been very brave. And in the beginning of the war, they fought off the invasion, and good for them. And I think, again, Mark Milley, Biden's Joint Chief of Staff's chief, said that and was very proud.
But here's the thing. Zelensky has made it.
Stalemate.
Zelensky has, a stalemate where you don't have the Russians taking over your entire country is preferable to where they would have been others. But here's the thing. Zelensky has made it clear, although he does not want there to be a deal where he loses any territory, but that losing Crimea and the areas of the Donbass region de facto, as in freezing the lines where the Russian troops have got control, but a guarantee, a cast iron 100% guarantee from America and Western European allies that not an inch more does any Russian steel toe cap venture over. Otherwise, no question at all, it's all over for Russia in Ukraine. If that security guarantee was given, it's been made very clear from Zelensky's office that that is something they would be willing to agree to. But that is not on the table. If Donald Trump really wanted peace and to stop what he calls the meat grinder, although for some reason he claims it's cost millions of lives when it hasn't. If he really wanted peace to stop the meat grinder, he could have peace probably in a week's time. So why doesn't he offer that?
Because that's basically like a de facto admission of Ukraine into NATO. It basically means we will fight with boots on the ground with our young men and women in uniform to defend Ukraine.
But we wouldn't have to do that because Putin's so trustworthy. He's Donald Trump's friend.
That's what I'm saying.
Do you seriously think that Putin would be stupid enough to go into Ukraine with that guarantee, believing it to be real?
He's done crazier things.
He doesn't. No, Vladimir Putin doesn't do crazy things. On the contrary, he doesn't.
The wild card here is Putin. We all know that.
The wild card is Trump. Putin's very predictable. Putin said he didn't recognise Ukraine was a sovereign nation state. He wanted to expand the Russian empire. He put 120,000 troops on the border, carried out exercises, practicing an invasion of Ukraine, put a load of tanks on the border, and then everyone went, "What a complete surprise that he's invaded." He said what he was going to do, and then he did it.
Yeah, well, look, I think that we've all learned that deterrence is what works, and they're peace through strength. And the time for deterrence was before February of 2022.
Okay,
it's a little late for that.
It's not late for that now because you could deter Putin from taking more of Ukraine.
Well, look, I think it's clear that the United States has to pivot to Asia, and there's no appetite for providing security guarantees for Ukraine when we're only in a position to fight a one-front war. Now, that's a shame because prior to Obama dialing down the military, we were prepared for a two-front war.
Okay.
Now we are not, and so it's just reality.
And I get that reality. And again, America is dealing with enemies on two different fronts, across two different oceans. However, what do you think the message is that has been received loud and clear by President Xi Jinping of China from America, which is we'll give you a bit of help, and then if you don't come to the table, do the deal, basically we're going to give up on you, and we've only got kind of 3 years in us in terms of interest in any war protecting a democratic nation state, like, for instance, Taiwan. What do you think that message is that China has received? Because I think the message they've received is, I think we'll have a go.
No, I think the message is that we are definitely pivoting to the Pacific and are well prepared. China is ascendant. They are trying to build up their navy. They have more ships than the United States right now, but our ships are much bigger and more powerful. Our Air Force is much bigger and more powerful. So, look, we're still the single superpower, but unfortunately, we are not prepared to fight a two-front war, especially not for Ukraine, who's not a member of NATO. So, look, it's an unpleasant situation, but I think it's up to the Europeans. The European economies combined are 10 times that of Russia.
Yeah, we need to step up.
And yet they have a pathetic military presence in Western Europe, outside of the UK, frankly. The UK is still, in a great condition, maybe not perfect. That's a different topic, but spending 2.5% of GDP on the military is still well prepared to defend their own country.
Well,
can't say that about France or Spain.
A large amount of that is on our nuclear capability, which we would hope we'd never use, but it means we haven't got quite the other hardware and men to fight. Greg Swenson, really appreciate you joining us. We appreciate your honesty. It's always so good to talk to you. He's chairman of Republicans Overseas UK.